Hey guys, and welcome back. This is James, and today we're going to be building a female woman's backpack. I've got that in my mind because I was discussing about it with a guy on Reddit just a minute ago. So the idea is to create a backpack for my girlfriend who wanted something to go to school. Yes, she's a teacher, and she wanted something to help her avoid having back problems, and I kept suggesting backpacks, and we couldn't really find something that she liked in terms of design. So we decided to design it ourselves and to try and find something we liked on the web and then rebuild something around that or use that as a base. So the reason I've got the idea that it's a woman's backpack comes from that. As you'll see, I believe it's slightly feminine because it's got nice curves to it. It's got slightly thinner straps, but of course I may say it's a woman's backpack, but obviously if it's a backpack for you and you enjoy it, whether or not you're a man or a woman, obviously it's going to be a backpack for you. So bear that in mind if I say woman's backpack. It's only in reference to the fact that this is a backpack for my girlfriend. As you saw me just a minute ago cut out the different pieces, I'm now cutting actually the strands that will be used for the shoulder pads and the straps. This is something I'm not used to doing. The previous bags I've used, I've bought straps made for it, so cutting out these straps was a bit of a delicate procedure for me because it's the first time I've been doing it. Now the tool I'm using is actually very useful for that, but I still managed to get the straps not as straight and as precise as I would have wanted, and that's something that we'll be seeing later on as well. In the build, we'll be seeing examples of that in areas where the straps didn't turn out too good. I wanted to have some kind of weird mottled effect on the dye here. I'm using Fiebing's walnut oil dye, and I'm mixing it with about 50-50 with neat's foot oil. So the idea is that the dye will not go on equally and that it will look splotchy, and in my mind I had something really cool with streaks going all up it, and there's something we'll be seeing in a second. I'd read someplace where wetting the leather would be helpful, so I tried to wet the leather beforehand, but indeed after searching a bit more today, so after finishing this process, I realized when they say wetting leather, they mean absolutely soaking it or getting it really nice and impregnated with water throughout, not just doing what I was doing, which is not very useful. And this is where I'm trying out the different lines here. I really like the idea of having a streaked effect. I think it could work. If I were to practice a bit, I might be able to get it to work. Ultimately, it does turn out really nicely. I do like the effect, although it's not what I had in mind. Fast forwarding, a bit more here. You can see this I've now applied quite a few coats, and I'm no longer trying to get an effect. I'm actually trying to minimize the damage that I'd been doing in the previous coats. Not totally sure how good it is for the leather to actually have this much oil applied to it. Ultimately, it seemed to work okay. The leather doesn't seem to have too much oil inside it, so I'm quite happy with that. The bag itself is going to be an interesting one. I wanted the stitching for the pockets inside and the sides not to be visible. That was the idea of going with something where the flaps sort of, for example, the previous bag, the flap was stitched on the outside, so turned towards the outside of the bag, so it was concave into the bag. That was the way the flaps sit in the bag is inside the bag. I wanted the flaps to come out of the bag. So I'm using obviously much thinner leather. This is 1.4 millimeters thick. I can't remember what that is in ounces for you guys, but I'm sure you'll be able to find it out. So it's quite thin, but not too thin that it doesn't make a nice solid base for the bag. I really wanted to have one big piece of leather go all the way around the bag, which is why I've got the innards of the bag with the stitching, and then one nice piece wrapping all around it. And you'll be able to see a bit later what I mean by that. Here I am preparing the straps. For this, because it's 1.4 millimeters leather only, I, as you can see, sandwiched a piece in between to give it some more substance. Works out well, although in hindsight, first of all, I would make sure that the piece in the middle is really nice and straight, because that's not something I was too worried about, and ultimately I didn't like the effect. I would have preferred it to be much straighter. And also the small piece of leather I used at the end, just to attach from the strap to the actual bag, was slightly too wide for the you can see it right now at the end of the strap. There's a small piece of leather sticking out. It was either too wide for the strap and made for some weird stitching at the end, we'll see that in a minute, or the strap itself was too thin. Again, I say a woman's bag because these straps are actually quite thin. She tried on my old bag, the one I made previously, where the straps are quite hefty, about 6 centimeters large. And well, for obvious female reasons, it was not comfortable at certain areas. So she wanted something a bit thinner, and this is why I came up with this design in size. I believe it's 3.5 centimeters wide, and this is where the end piece of the strap comes in awkward because it's just slightly too large for those stitches to set properly. Now, obviously before stitching, I'm hammering through there, trying to be as precise as possible and making sure I'm beveling the edges. Get yourselves a decent edge beveler. It doesn't need to be great, it just needs to be decent. I've slowed this down, or at least I'm playing this at regular speed, just to show you how much actual thread there was here. It is ridiculous. So here I am just trying to find the centerpiece of that one piece of thread that I'm using. I like the idea of using one piece of thread going all the way around the piece, the strap. Obviously, you don't need to do it this way. This is just, I like it this way. Another issue is if ever the stitching failed, I guess you'd have to replace the whole thing, so that would be an absolute pain as well. Whereas if you did it in 3 bits, for example, of stitching, then you wouldn't have to replace the whole thing. But that's another discussion completely, a complete other debate. So yeah, stitching took quite a long time on this bag for reasons that I did not expect and that we will be seeing soon. But so far it was very basic. I was very happy stitching here because these are just 2 layers of 1.4mm thick leather, and the needles were going straight through, and it was really easy, really nice. And this is the end. So you can see at the end here where it sort of bulges out, where the middle section is just slightly too thick and it makes some weird stitching. But overall, I'm really happy. I love the mottled effect that has appeared on these straps. Now, this was not deliberate, but there is a slight mottled effect that we can just barely see, which I really enjoy. At this point, the strap was quite dry, obviously, because I've been treating it with different stuff. So I'm using these de-makeup pads, which I find extremely useful for spreading neat's foot oil along a base. They cost nothing and they absorb great. And once you finish with them, you can just get rid of them. Yeah, it's not very ecological, I have to admit, but it just works perfectly. And yes, I've got some dye on my thumb. I think my thumb was brown for the next 4 days or something like that afterwards, but that's just part of the joy. So you can see the strap behind, and notice the color. You will see the straps change in color 3 times. Well, go through 3 different colors, so change twice basically. The first time is here when I start putting the oil on, which I'm going to accelerate. There we go. And you can suddenly see it darken. Obviously, this is the oils are darkening the leather and giving it that suppleness that the strap will need. And you can see the difference from the first strap already there. The second process I will be applying, which we'll see in a second, is actually I decided to use shoe polish for all of the bag. I wanted to see what the effect it would have, and I used that. So we're having a quick closer look at the end here, and I am not happy with the way this turned out. It just looks clumsy, it's clunky, it's not very well done. The rest of it is okay. It's not the best, straightest lines, of course, because the leather wasn't cut very well at the beginning, which is something I mentioned previously. But hey, these are straps, I'm happy. And this is now burnished. And suddenly, once you've burnished it, it looks so much better suddenly. You can still see the slight mottled pattern here, which again I really like, and I was very worried that I would lose it throughout the piece. And there we go. This third final form of the straps, this is after the shoe polish has been applied. Please tell me what you think of shoe polish as a finisher in the description below. It's something that is extremely easy to get hold of. It's probably not the best, but I find it does a great job at nourishing the leather and giving it a darker edge to it, a darker side or a darker feel to it once you've applied it. If you're applying dark shoe polish as I was, do tell me in the comments what you think if you guys use that, because I like the idea of being able to buy it anywhere. I just really like the idea of having it so readily available. I am now preparing the inner pocket. I wanted it to be functional. I don't really care about aesthetics for the inside. It's not my priority. I did want to make sure the top edge was burnished properly, because that would feel or see there would be a lot of friction there from just putting things in and out of there. And yeah, so this is the inner pocket. Again, nothing too spectacular, just wanted to make sure it was practical. It's very deep, very useful, and I have to say it's a great feature in the bags. Too often I find that pockets are just not big enough inside bags, and it really frustrates me no end when you can't get a mouse or something, or a charger or anything in there. So I wanted it to be nice and thick, and I'm very pleased with the result of this. I have to say it works well. I did use neat's foot oil on the edges there, or at least on the places where the leather would bend, and as you can see it's now been attached to the inside of the leather. So I skipped through that process, and I did use neat's foot oil inside where it would bend, hoping that it would give it a bit more longevity. We'll see what happens there. I was at this point quite worried about over oiling my pieces, but again, I suppose time will tell. This is going to be one of the sides. We're going to finally discover, I'll show you very quickly, or soon, how the sides turn out and what my plan was for the sides, because this was really the whole point of the bag. The idea was that the side stitching had to be hidden inside the bag, and that you could only see the outside stitching on the outside, and not the innards, like the pocket or the sides or anything I wanted to add there. This sort of worked out. I don't know how well, but it sort of worked out. So the sides, I've now cut the curvature to the sides, which is going to determine the curvature of the bag, and I'm now stitching or placing a second layer at the top to make sure it's nice and strong, first of all, and secondly to make sure I can burnish the edge quite nicely, because I find burnishing 1.4mm edges really tough. Oops, sorry, just trying to get focusing there right. Whereas if I've got two of those thicknesses, as you can see here, I find the burnishing process much easier. Obviously, make sure you bevel your edges, make sure you sand your edges before dyeing it and burnishing it. I'm using the same process as the previous bag, where I have cut a slight groove inside the side of the bag. And once this will be stitched up, this groove will enable the sides to have a certain rigidity, and I didn't want the sides to bulge out. That was my main worry here. I wanted them to stay nice and straight, and I wanted them, if possible, to bulge inwards as much as possible, because these sides would be curving outwards, and I was afraid that the flap just wouldn't cover it and stuff would get into the bag. You can see I've now stitched up the edge of this, and you can start guessing, I think, where I'm going with this. So obviously making sure that I can get all the stitching holes ready for the next process. And the next process was really tough. I wanted to have a computer pocket or a divide inside the bag. You can see the first line of stitching is ready here. My holes are all ready to be stitched up inside the bag, and I've left quite a big gap, and you will see why, because there is let's call it a flange. I'm not sure how we call it, but let's call it a flange for now, between, or it basically from the side to the inside stitching of the side. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter. We'll see very soon what I mean by there. So the sides are coming on, and as you can see, they will be stitched facing inwards, or at least they'll be going inwards. The stitching isn't lined up with the edge of the bag, it's actually inside the bag. And this is the whole process, the whole thought process behind it. I wanted to hide those stitchings. This is when things get really tough. This, as you can see, the flap I'm playing with now is the divide for the inner computer case pockets, and this is going to be the biggest challenge on my bag, because I now had 3 layers that I had to sandwich one in between the other 2 in order to be able to stitch, and the sandwiching process was always quite awkward. I was very worried that I would be pulling the leather too much. I was thinking at this point, good God, this is going to take ages. at least the second side shouldn't be too hard, and I was wrong, the second side was worse. As you can see here, this is what it looks like on the inside. The flaps are bulging inwards, which is what I wanted, and the sides are now sandwiched between the back and the computer divide. Yes, there are some issues with stitching, which is not great, but at this point, the stitching on the inside, I really don't care because you won't be able to see it. So I just wanted the sides to be straight. Second side is now on, and you can see how it's going inwards nicely. At this point, I'm very happy with myself. I've now finished what I consider to be the hardest part. The inside pocket is looking good. The inside computer case divide is looking fine. So I decided to start on the next piece, which is the back piece, or at least the back piece. I say the back piece, but it's actually the piece that will wrap around that inner sleeve that has just been finished. So I've got the inner sleeve with the 2 pockets and the 2 sides, and that's all looking great. And now I need to attach the back to it. I've already put on the shoulder belts, or why am I forgetting all the names here? The straps. I've already put on the straps. I've already glued on the back of the bag to the back of the inside sleeve, and now I'm getting ready to place the closing mechanism. Obviously I've moved forwards quite a few steps here, but you can guess what I've been doing here. So it's basically wrapping around that outside piece onto the inside sleeve and gluing it up all the way there. But at this point we have to stop the gluing process and decide where we want the attachment systems to go, because we want it to look seamless. I did reinforce all of these different points by having a second layer of 1.4mm leather wherever there is a stress point, so that is at the strap, top and bottom, as well as the closing mechanism. I was making sure that all the stress points were reinforced with a second layer of leather, just in case, just to make it more durable really. As you can see, the gluing process is slow, and I swear 2 hours later I could still smell only neoprene glue. That is all I could smell for the rest of the evening. It was ridiculous. But it worked. It worked very well. I'm not a fan of gluing so much leather together. I feel like it's sort of wrong. It's not right for the leather. It's not a clean process. I don't know if that means anything to anyone else out there, but I like the idea of not using glue, and I was really annoyed at having to use it here. However, that being said, it adds a lot of strength and structural integrity to the bag, really bringing this bag together, and it was an essential piece of the build here. I couldn't do it without gluing, and as you can see, the bag behind is really starting to look like a proper bag now. I've done all the edges, I've beveled all the edges, I've made it look a bit more like an interesting piece of equipment, of gear, and I'm now working on the flap. The flap is again 2 pieces of leather, 1.4mm times 2, so nearly 3mm of leather put together with glue in the middle, of course, and just lots of time and energy spent making sure the edges are really nice. I wanted the flap to be perfect. I didn't get it to be perfect, of course, but I wanted to. I was hoping to get as close to perfect as possible, because that is going to be the one main thing you can see from the outside of the bag, because the flap is going to come down over the full length of the bag. I've actually had someone on Reddit who compared the bag to a Japanese school bag, which is actually very close, and I'm going to try and find the name of that for you right now, because yeah, there we go, a Randoseru, and I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, but a Randoseru is a Japanese school bag that's apparently given to school kids on their first year of school, and it's supposed to last them 6 years, if I've understood correctly. You guys will probably correct me in the chat anyway, but the idea is it's a simple bag with very solid sides and back, and a huge flap that comes over to make sure that everything stays nice and safe and nice and dry, basically, and it's incredibly solid. And yes, dog in the background, beer on the table, tea, and girlfriend working in the background as well. And here is the first look of the flap. I was quite happy with it. As you can see, the sides are edging inwards, which is perfect, meaning the flap covers everything just as I wanted it. Yes, there are many mistakes still, but hey, at this point I was very happy. I'm now finishing up the last few elements of the bag before I can start oiling it once more and making sure it's greased and covered and protected and all that. And this is seeing where I want the attachments to go. Now, off camera, I did attach them to the inside of the flap, and I am now applying the you know, the shoe polish. It sounds silly to say, but I really love this stuff. It really gives a nice dark, warm feel to the color of the bag, brings out the accents in the leather. It's probably not the best if you want a really nice uniform look to the leather, but I really wanted that mottled effect to accentuate it. Moreover, it protects the bag, and as you can see, it suddenly becomes very nice and shiny and homogeneous in terms of color, and it's starting to really look great. So briefly, one thing I regret is not attaching the inside clips earlier to the bag before putting on the top, because there are stitching marks and I was really hoping to avoid it. But there we go, this is the bag, and overall I'm very happy. You can see the two inside pockets, or the inside pocket and the divide there, as well as the attachment system, which is completely invisible from the outside except for the stitching. The leather came out looking glorious, which I was very worried about at first, but I'm very happy with the way it all turned out. The edges are looking great, and as you can see, it's got that small edge to it at the edges there. It's got the small bevel, I'm not sure how to explain it, the ledge there. Opening and closing is easy once you get the hang of it. It's nice and compact, and I really like it. So there we go, guys. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Do tell me in the comments what you thought of this bag and this video, and I'll see you next time for some more leather work.